I call Chris Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Pleasure to take a call on the New Zealand Superannuation and Retirement Income Amendment Bill. This is a sensible and prudent bill that will make the super fund, or the guardians of the super fund, allow them to run the super fund better, the Cullen Fund, as it's affectionately known by Labor members. And I do want to start my speech with a couple of points of rebuttal to Mr Robertson. And the first is about the case that he's been prosecuting recently about the national government's apparent failure to achieve a surplus in the 2014-15 financial year. Of course, we won't actually know whether or not that's achieved until sometime in the next financial year. But it is, I have to say, Mr Speaker, a rather comical complaint from Mr Robertson and Labor members, because after 7 years of complaining about the cuts that the national government has made, or the fiscal restraint, as we would term it on this side of the House, and after 7 years of claiming that the only thing the government is getting wrong is that they're not spending more money, and I remember the days of David Cunliffe and other finance spokespeople, there's been a few of them in the Labor Party over the last 7 years, talking about Keynesian spending and deficit spending being required. After all that time, and after the fiscal legacy left to us by the Labor Party, it is rather amusing, I have to say, it wasn't 9 surpluses in a row, actually, Mr Clark, it wasn't 9 surpluses in a row. The 2008-9 financial accounts ended up with a deficit of $4 billion because of your woeful mismanagement of the Crown accounts. So it is comical to hear the Labor Party complain about the failure to achieve surplus. Second point in rebuttal I want to say, sir, is that is the claim by the Labor Party that the government should have been basically putting money on the state credit card to invest in the share market over the last 7 years through the Cullen Fund. Because let's make no mistake about it, that is the equivalent of what the Labor Party has said, is that over the last 7 years, the government should have been whipping out the credit card, whipping out the government credit card, going down to the ANZ cash point on Lambton Quay, whipping out as much money as possible and paying exorbitant interest rates on that money, sir, and investing it in the share market. Or, sir, an equivalent would be borrowing more money on a mortgage in order to invest in the share market. Well, the government, I think, sir, quite rightly and quite wisely took the view that that was not a prudent use of taxpayers' money in a time of fiscal restraint, and declined to do that. So, sir, let me come to the objective of this bill. And the major change that the bill makes, sir, is to amend Part 2 of the Act to allow the Guardians to control what's known in the terminology as fund investment vehicles, or FIVs, as some have called them. And of course, the current Section 59 of the Act stops the Guardians from controlling any other entity. And, sir, the submission by the super fund, by the Guardians, was that this is inconsistent with the obligation under the Act to invest consistently with best practice or best management practice. So, sir, the change that this bill makes allows the Guardians to lower their costs, to manage their risk better, and to structure their investments more efficiently. And, sir, I think there is widespread unanimity across the House that this is a sensible change to make. It was interrogated pretty clearly and diligently by the Finance and Expenditure Committee. I wasn't a member of that committee, having only entered Parliament in September 2014, but I have diligently gone and read the Select Committee report, as all diligent members of Parliament do. That's right, isn't it, Mr Mitchell? And a very hard-working committee indeed. And I've got to say, since the new chair and deputy chair have stepped onto that committee, the workload has really increased. It really has. And I've got to say, I also have to pay tribute to the ranking member from the Labor Party on that committee, who's been a very conscientious member of Parliament on that committee. So let me talk briefly about the super fund, because I think it is not wrong to acknowledge that it is one of the better things that Michael Cullen did. And the member who spoke before me, Grant Robertson, described Michael Cullen in a newspaper article on the weekend as one of his political heroes. And that's fair enough. Michael Cullen kept the fiscal, kept things pretty tight fiscally for the first 6 years of his administration. Well, I've got to say, those last 3 years from 2005 to 2008, when spending went massively out of control, and I might add, for actually no tangible outcome, because it was the Salvation Army in 2008 that lamented the lack of social progress under the last government, despite the very large increase in state spending. So it's fair enough that Michael Cullen set up this fund. Also fair to acknowledge on this side of the House that the National Party in those days opposed the setting up of the fund. But I think we would acknowledge nowadays, sir, on the government benches, that the super fund has proven to be useful and effective. And as the Minister of Finance rightly pointed out in his first reading speech on this bill, sir, quite an elegant scheme, quite an elegantly structured scheme in order to maximise returns for taxpayers, essentially a form of pre-funding of New Zealand superannuation, essentially preserving tax rates at the rates they are now, in effect lowering real tax rates for taxpayers today to avoid increases in the future. Of course, sir, Grant Robertson rightly pointed out that the fund has made remarkable or pretty good returns in its time since it was set up in 2003. But sir, I do want to briefly deal with the suggestion that we should change the independence of the super fund, because every now and then you do get political parties or commentators or people involved in the financial industry who say that the fund should do something different from what it does now. The beauty of the fund as it is at the moment is that it is wholly independent from government. And sir, I believe, and members on this side of the House believe that that is the right structure for the fund. When it comes to dealing with something like $30 billion of assets for the Crown, about 40% of the Crown's balance sheet, that has to be managed prudently and effectively, and that means independence from ministers. But you do hear groups every now and then say, well, the fund should do something with the money that's invested in it. And I was reading back through, sir, the first reading of this bill, and we had a suggestion from Russell Norman that the super fund should perhaps consider investing in the forestry industry. Well, that's fair enough. That's Russell Norman's prerogative to call for that. If he thinks it's a good investment, I would invite Mr Norman to go and borrow some money and invest in the forestry industry if it's a good return. But actually, the best thing is to make sure, or the right thing to do, sorry, sir, is to make sure that it's not what individual politicians standing in Parliament think. It's actually people who know how business works and actually people who know how to maximise returns. And I'm certainly not in a position to do that. No disrespect to my colleague Mr Norman, I don't think he's in the position to do that. And you just heard a concession from Mr English, the Minister of Finance, that he's not either. So you've got to leave it to the experts. And so there is real risk with interfering with the independence of the fund. You also heard a suggestion every now and then from the New Zealand First Party, who I've got to say are all over the shop on this issue, that there should be some tie-up between the New Zealand Super Fund and KiwiSaver and KiwiSaver guarantees. And indeed, just from Grant Robertson, just a few moments ago, you heard a suggestion that the fund should consider redirecting some of its money into small and medium-sized enterprises. And again, that's a thing that Mr Robertson wants. Fair enough for him to call for that. But sir, I think when you start to have politicians interfering in the direction of the fund, what you do is you potentially compromise the returns to the fund. And sir, the view on this side of the House is that you should have the experts independent from government investing the funds on behalf of taxpayers and trying to maximise returns. And once you start fiddling with the independence of the fund, there will be no end to where you might get down, what areas you might get involved in. Sir, the New Zealand Super Fund is independent. It is regarded as one of the best sovereign wealth funds in the world. People often say that New Zealand should set up a sovereign wealth fund. We actually already have one. And actually it's regarded as one of the best practice sovereign wealth funds in the world. Sir, the changes promoted by this bill will allow the guardians of the super fund to exercise their responsibilities to maximise returns for taxpayers. Mr Robertson rightly pointed out a bit of back and forth in the committee about allowing the use of funding investment vehicles. The Finance and Expenditure Committee came to the view that the changes would be okay, and I acknowledge the SOP being moved by the Minister to further preserve the independence of the fund at the committee stage. I commend this bill to the House.
Dr David Clark.